The night the hour slipped away was quieter than rain. I remember it the way you remember a dream after you wake, faint, luminous, trembling on the edge of forgetting. Time itself seemed to pause, holding its breath, and a silver hush settled over the hills. Somewhere far above, a thin seam opened in the sky, spilling a pale shimmer that drifted down like a feather. No one saw it fall, except a boy leaning out of his window, unable to sleep, his chin resting on the cool wood of the sill. He was small and slight, with hair the color of early wheat and eyes that reflected every passing cloud. He did not yet know that he would grow into someone others turned toward in quiet moments. That night, he only felt the tug of something unusual, a beckoning so soft it might have been imagined. He watched the silver glimmer float, caught briefly on a breeze, before vanishing beyond the fields. It left behind a sense that something had shifted, that the world was a fraction roomier than it had been a heartbeat ago. He crept back beneath his blanket, though sleep did not come. The feather of light, or was it an hour, lost from some hidden clock, hovered inside his thoughts. He imagined it slipping through the dark toward a place waiting just beyond his understanding. That tender mystery pressed against his ribs, making him feel fragile and strong all at once. As dawn began to erase the stars, he traced the outline of the far-off house with his gaze. He had seen it only once before, a silhouette on the horizon, windows catching morning gold. People said no one lived there, yet on certain nights the air around it hummed with something like music. He sensed that the fallen hour had rolled toward that house, as if drawn by the faint rhythm of laughter behind closed doors. The boy, whose name will matter later, though not now, sat up, hugging his knees. The air smelled of damp grass and faraway pine, and he felt for the first time that the night was speaking directly to him. Not in words, but in a language made of wind, of gentle rustling, of the steady beat of his own heart. He promised the silence he would follow its trail when the day had grown long enough to soften its edges. Morning finally stretched itself across the fields, warm and forgiving. He dressed with a careful slowness, as though not to disturb the fragile secret hanging between one moment and the next. Stepping outside, he felt the world tilt, subtle and kind, nudging him forward. Each blade of grass held a pearl of dew. Each stone seemed to know his steps before he placed them. Somewhere ahead, beyond the bend of a path he had never walked, waited the house where music lingered, and maybe, just maybe, the missing hour. He began to walk, and with each step, the air brightened around him, as if grateful for his choice. He carried no map, no plan, only a quiet certainty that he was meant to go. Birds stirred from their hiding places, their wings lifting morning light into the sky. He followed the soft chorus until the village lay small behind him, and the unknown stretched out in patient welcome. And though he could not name it, something inside him was changing. A space was opening, tender and wide, ready to hold whatever the day would give. The boy felt small, but not alone, as if an unseen companion walked beside him, humming a tune only he could hear. The adventure waiting ahead was not one of battles or quests, but of noticing, of learning how to listen to what the world says when it whispers. Morning widened into a soft blue, the kind that seems to wait for someone to notice it. The boy walked along a lane lined with hedges still beaded with dew, each drop catching the light like tiny bells. He felt unhurried, as if the day itself were strolling at his side. Fields breathed out mist, and somewhere in the distance a lark lifted its thin song into the sky. He thought of the silver hour that had fallen through the dark, and a quiet warmth moved through him, part curiosity, part welcome he could not explain. The path curved toward a low hill, and as he climbed he saw the house again, clearer now, though softened by morning haze. Its roof sloped gently, and the windows held a faint glow, as if they remembered a candle from long ago. No smoke rose from the chimney, yet the boy felt certain someone was waiting there. He paused on the crest, drawing the cool air deep into his chest, letting it steady the slight tremble in his hands. Down the far side of the hill lay a meadow stitched with wildflowers. He crossed it slowly, touching petals with his fingertips. Bees moved lazily between blossoms, and a single butterfly hovered near his shoulder, bright as a piece of sunlit paper. He almost spoke to it, thinking it might understand if he whispered carefully enough. Instead, he only smiled, grateful for the gentle company. At the edge of the meadow, he found a narrow gate, its latch smooth from years of quiet use. Beyond it stretched a shaded lane, lined with poplars. Their leaves made a soft sound, like rain far away, and the air beneath them felt cool and kind. He stepped through, and felt for a moment that he had crossed into a place slightly apart from the rest of the world. The lane led him toward the house's garden. A low stone wall circled it, half hidden under ivy. Through an opening he glimpsed a patch of grass scattered with fallen petals, and a bench carved from load oak. The scent of something sweet drifted through, perhaps lilac, perhaps memory itself. He stood very still, unsure if he should enter, until he heard a voice humming faintly, a tune soft enough to be mistaken for wind. Following the sound, he passed through the gap in the wall. The garden welcomed him with shade and fragrance. Moss clung to the stones, and tiny white flowers grew in their cracks. On the bench sat an elderly man, head bowed as though listening to the earth. When he looked up, his eyes were gentle, bright with laughter that had not yet been spoken. "You've come early," the man said, his tone quiet but pleased. "Most wait until the afternoon, but mornings have their own music." The boy felt shy yet oddly safe. "I didn't know I was coming," he admitted. "I just started walking." "That's often the best way," the man replied, patting the seat beside him. "Time likes to be found, not chased." They sat together in companionable silence. Birds rustled in the hedges, and the man traced idle circles on the bench with his finger. At length he spoke again, telling a small story about tending the garden, how each plant taught him patience. He said the trick was not to make things grow faster, but to notice how they grew. The boy listened, feeling as though these words settled into a hidden part of him, a place where questions became seeds. A breeze stirred the branches above them, carrying the faintest echo of music, a melody without instruments, a rhythm like breathing. The boy tilted his head, but the man only smiled knowingly. "That's the house," he said. "It remembers songs even when no one plays them." For a while they stayed there, speaking little. When the sun rose higher, spilling gold across the garden, the man rose slowly. "Go on inside," he said, nodding toward the house. "Whatever you're meant to find, it's waiting." The boy hesitated, savoring the stillness before stepping forward. He felt a soft pulse of gratitude, as though the earth itself approved of his small courage. The door ahead stood open, just enough to show a slice of cool shadow, a promise of stories waiting within. The door welcomed him with a sigh, as though the hinges remembered other arrivals, other quiet footsteps. He stepped inside, and the coolness wrapped around him like river water. Dust floated in pale ribbons through shafts of light, and somewhere beyond the hall a low murmur of voices drifted, calm and unhurried. The floor creaked softly, each board steadying him as he moved. A long corridor stretched ahead, its walls lined with pictures. Some showed landscapes half recognized, a field he might have crossed, a corner of sky familiar from dreams. Others were gentle portraits of people whose faces felt almost known. He paused before one, a girl sitting on a swing, her hair caught in a breeze that smelled of wild thyme even now. The frame was warm beneath his fingertips, as though the memory inside still lived. He followed the scent of something sweet, perhaps tea or honey, and soon reached a room bright with morning. Sunlight fell across rugs faded by many summers. Around a table sat a small circle of people, each with an air of waiting that felt patient rather than expectant. They greeted him with nods, smiles so soft they seemed to rest rather than shine. A woman offered him a cup. "You've come for the hour," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Her voice held kindness threaded with quiet amusement. "But there's no hurry. Sit. The hour is shy. It likes warmth before it shows itself." He joined them, letting the chair take his weight. They talked about small things, a bird's nest in the rafters, the smell of rain on slate, the way stars looked clearer after storms. Their words left space for silence, and in that space the boy felt himself unfolding, as if his own edges were softening. When the tea was done, the woman led him through another door into a room filled with shelves. Not books exactly, but boxes shaped like books, each labeled with a date. "Moments," she explained, brushing dust from a lid. "Every one gathered from people who nearly lost them. We keep them until they're ready to remember." She placed a tiny box in his hands. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. He did not open it yet, but held it carefully, sensing its quiet weight. Before leaving, he looked back at the circle around the table. They raised their cups in a silent farewell, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest, the kind you carry long after words have faded. He climbed a narrow staircase, still holding the small box. Upstairs, the air was cooler, brushed with lavender. A window at the landing opened onto a courtyard where light lay thick and golden. He stood for a moment, breathing in the hush, then turned toward a half-open door. Inside was a room lined with instruments, flutes carved from pale wood, tiny bells, a cello leaning in the corner. At the center stood a man, tuning a stringed instrument shaped like a crescent moon. He glanced up, smiling, and gestured for the boy to come closer. "Every sound tells a story," he said, plucking a note that floated like mist. "Some teach you to listen before you speak." The boy set the box on a stool and sat cross-legged on the floor. The man played a melody so soft it felt woven from breath itself. With each note, memories seemed to loosen. Times the boy had waited in quiet fields, evenings he had watched clouds drift toward night. The music did not make him sad or glad, it made him whole, as though every scattered piece of him found its rightful place. When the tune faded, the man nodded toward the box. "Open it." Inside lay a single feather, silver with a faint glow. It trembled in his palm, lighter than thought, yet steady as a heartbeat. As he held it, a hush passed through the room, and he felt a tender warmth along his spine, as if the hour he had chased was settling into him. He asked what he should do with it. The man's eyes crinkled. "Keep it near, but don't hold too tightly. Hours are like birds. They stay because they choose to." The boy tucked the feather into his pocket. As he rose to leave, he felt taller. Though nothing had changed in his body, something inside had learned a new shape, as if listening itself had stretched him gently wider. Downstairs, the house seemed brighter. Voices floated like calm water from distant rooms, and the scent of baking bread touched the air. He realized he was hungry, but not for food alone. He hungered for more this quiet knowing, for people who spoke in kindness rather than haste. Stepping outside, he found the garden bathed in amber light. Bees still wandered among blossoms, untroubled by the passing hours. He sat on the bench where he had met the old gardener and watched the feathers faint shimmer through the fabric of his pocket. He understood without words that it wasn't just an hour he had been given, but a way of seeing, a patient rhythm to guide him as he moved through the wide, waiting world. He woke the next morning to a room filled with pale light, the kind that seems to pause before touching the floor. For a moment he lay still, listening to the hush that pressed gently against the windows. The feather rested on the small table beside him, its glow dim but steady, like a candle remembering its own flame. He reached for it, not to take, but to greet, and felt a quiet reassurance travel up his arm, a reminder that time could be soft if you let it. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of warm bread. Someone had left a plate on the table, steam still curling from its surface. He ate slowly, grateful for the way each bite anchored him inside the morning. Through an open door he could see the garden sparkling with dew, 100 tiny suns trembling on the grass. A voice drifted in, humming the same tune he had heard from the man with the moon-shaped instrument. Curious, he followed the sound to a sunlit corridor that led toward the back of the house. There he found a narrow archway opening onto a small courtyard. At its center, a shallow pool reflected the sky, broken only by the ripples of a single goldfish tracing patient circles. Seated beside the water was a woman arranging stones into quiet patterns. She looked up and smiled, as though she had been expecting him. "Every stone keeps a story," she said, placing one carefully beside another. "The trick is to lay them where they can breathe." He crouched next to her, watching as she built a circle around the pool. Each stone seemed to hum faintly when she set it down. She handed him one, smooth, cool, heavy with something he could almost sense. Together they placed stones until a gentle mosaic spread out like a map. When they finished, she dipped her hand into the water and drew up a single droplet, holding it where sunlight could catch it. "Moments are like this," she murmured. "They slip through if you try to hold them too tight, but if you learn their rhythm, they stay just long enough." He felt something stir in his chest, a calm longing to understand how to listen to such rhythms. As they sat by the pool, the feather warmed softly against his side, as though agreeing. Later, wandering through the orchard beyond the courtyard, he found paths lined with soft moss and low branches heavy with pale fruit. He plucked one, biting into its cool sweetness, and thought about how everything in this place asked only that he notice it fully. The air, the trees, even the stones by the pool seemed alive with patient invitation. By the time the sun leaned westward, he sensed that the day had taught him something without words. That time, when met with gentleness, opens like a hand. Evening settled over the house in slow layers, lavender at first, then a deeper blue that cradled the trees. He sat on the steps with the feather resting across his knees, stroking its smooth spine with one finger. Lamps glowed softly inside, but he preferred the quiet dusk, the way the world seemed to draw close without asking for anything. A faint knock reached him from the side of the house. He followed it to a door he hadn't seen before, small and painted the color of faded wheat. When he pushed it open, the staircase curved downward, lit by lanterns set into the walls. Their glow pooled on each step, inviting rather than urging. At the bottom lay a room that smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Shelves lined the walls, holding jars filled with odd things, curled leaves, pieces of river glass, folded scraps of paper. At the center stood an elderly woman with silver hair braided down her back. She greeted him with eyes bright as polished stones. "These are keeps," she said, gesturing to the shelves. "Not treasures in the usual sense, but whispers of lives, things people thought they'd lost." She placed a jar in his hands. Inside lay a small paper boat, edges frayed from a forgotten storm. "It belonged to a boy who once waited for someone by the sea," she explained. "When he was ready to remember, the sea gave it back." He traced the tiny folds with care, feeling the faint echo of its story. She showed him others, a ringlet of dried lavender, a shell with a hole worn smooth, a button that had held the sleeve of an old friend's coat. Each object felt alive, humming with memory too gentle for words. When she asked if he wished to leave something of his own, he hesitated. His pockets were empty, except the feather, and that was not meant to be given away. After a pause, he untied the thin cord from around his wrist, a scrap he'd worn since he was small, though he couldn't remember who had tied it there. The woman nodded as he placed it carefully in an empty jar. "One day," she said, "you may want it returned, but for now, it will keep your growing safe." They shared tea, brewed from dried flowers, its warmth carrying notes of honey and smoke. As he drank, he felt the slow settling of contentment. the way still water holds the shape of the moon. When he finally climbed the steps back toward the cool night, the air smelled of wood smoke and stars. He returned to the steps and watched the feather glimmer faintly in the starlight. The house around him seemed to breathe, holding everything gently in its quiet heart. He felt a patient strength rising inside, not sudden, but steady, like the unfolding of leaves toward the sun. The morning arrived soft and unhurried, sunlight spilling across the garden in long, slow fingers. The boy stepped out, carrying the feather tucked carefully into the pocket of his coat. The air was alive with the subtle music of leaves brushing against each other and the occasional hum of a distant bee. Every sound felt deliberate, as though the world had paused to allow him to listen more closely. He wandered along a narrow path that led toward the orchard, noticing small details he had never paid attention to before, the way a spider's web glimmered with dew, the gentle curve of an ivy tendril, the shadow of a branch falling across the soft earth. Each step felt guided, and he understood, without words, that the house had more lessons in waiting for him. Ahead he saw a boy his own age, sitting beneath a tree, sketching in a notebook. Their eyes met briefly, and the boy nodded, as though recognizing a kindred curiosity. He approached cautiously, then settled on the grass beside him. Words came slowly at first, soft and deliberate, as they shared observations about clouds, birds, and the quiet ripple of the wind. Through these exchanges, the boy realized that connection could be gentle, like water sliding over stone, leaving no mark but smoothing the edges of both hearts. After a while, the sketching boy laughed quietly, a sound like rainfall over dry leaves. "You notice everything," he said. "Most people walk too fast to see it." "I'm learning," the first boy replied, fingers brushing the grass, feeling each stem. "The house teaches me how." Together, they walked along the orchard, letting silence fill the spaces between them. The feather in the first boy's pocket seemed to pulse faintly, as if approving this companionship. Sunlight moved across their path, softening as it passed through leaves, and the world felt gentle, deliberate, and waiting. As evening drew near, they returned to the house. The glow from the windows held promise, and the faint scent of baked bread made the first boy's stomach stir in a comforting way. Before parting, the sketching boy pressed a small, pressed flower into his palm. "For noticing," he whispered. "So you remember?" That night, as the boy lay in his room, the feather beside him, he realized that the day had taught him the quiet art of companionship. Not loud, not insistent, but calm and patient, the way music settles in a room long after the last note. Dawn crept in again with a soft glow, brushing the house with pale honey and warming the garden gently. The boy moved slowly through the rooms, each step mindful, each glance intentional. The feather still rested near his heart, reminding him of the lessons of waiting, noticing, and quiet presence. He wandered into the study, a room filled with books stacked in irregular towers. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight, and the scent of old paper wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. One book fell from a high shelf with a gentle thud, opening to a page that seemed to call him forward. Words were sparse, but they carried a rhythm that felt like breathing. He sat on the rug and traced each line with his finger, letting the cadence settle into him. A soft knock at the door pulled his attention. The elderly woman from the previous day entered, holding a small tray with cups of warm tea. She set it down without a word, smiling, and took a seat beside him. They shared the silence, drinking slowly, letting the quiet swell and fold around them. "Not everything is meant to be understood at once," she said finally, voice low and steady. "Some things are meant to be felt. Notice them, and they will teach you their language." He nodded, absorbing the lesson, not as instruction, but as a melody to carry in his chest. After tea, she led him to a long window overlooking a pond, where water lilies floated like resting thoughts. They watched together as ripples spread across the surface, each circle widening gently, touching every corner before fading. "You see," she murmured, "even the smallest action, the slightest notice, can touch far beyond its beginning." The boy smiled quietly, understanding that he was learning to move through the world lightly, leaving tenderness in his wake. The feather glimmered faintly in his pocket, as though echoing the truth that patience and Ev, even in subtle ways, hold a power all their own. As night approached, he stepped outside into the garden, letting the scent of flowers and the hush of evening fold around him. Lanterns glowed in the distance, and he felt the steady rhythm of the house, a pulse of quiet warmth and welcome. For the first time, he understood that this place, these people, the feather, the day itself, all of it existed to teach him how to hold the world with gentle hands, how to notice and how to care. The morning light was thin and soft, painting the garden in delicate shades of gold and green. The boy walked along the stone path that wound through the orchard, the feather tucked safely in his pocket. He felt a quiet anticipation, not of events or surprises, of the subtle rhythms the house seemed to pulse with. Every leaf, every petal, every distant bird call felt like a note in a gentle symphony meant only for those who could listen closely. He reached the courtyard where the shallow pool lay still, reflecting the sky in perfect clarity. The stones arranged by the woman glimmered faintly in the sunlight, each pattern a whisper of patience and care. He sat on the edge of the pool, dangling his fingers just above the water, feeling the faint ripple of the world beneath his touch. The sketching boy joined him, carrying a small bundle of pressed flowers tied with string. "For remembering," he said softly, handing the bundle over. Together they placed the flowers in the water, watching them float as though guided by invisible hands. The gentle motion created concentric ripples, spreading slowly, touching every corner of the courtyard. The boy understood, without needing words, that even small acts carried weight, that tenderness could move far beyond its origin. Later they wandered to the orchard, where the elderly man with the moon-shaped instrument waited. He plucked a few notes that drifted in the air like clouds, soft and unhurried. The boy listened, eyes closed, feeling the melody fold around him, imprinting itself in the quietest parts of his mind. The world felt larger, softer, as if every sound and sight was stitched together with invisible threads of care. As evening fell, the house exhaled a gentle sigh, the lanterns casting a honeyed glow. The boy realized that the day had taught him about presence, how simply being aware, simply noticing could be an act of love. The feather in his pocket pulsed faintly, as though affirming the lessons the day had whispered. Night spread slowly over the house, bringing a velvety darkness that cradled every corner. The boy walked through the hallways, noticing the warmth of the floor beneath his feet. The hush of shadows, the faint echo of voices carried through the walls. He felt a sense of belonging that was quiet and steady, not loud or urgent, but deep enough to fill the spaces inside him. He entered the study, where the shelves of jars and keeps stood. The elderly woman was arranging a small collection of tiny trinkets. She looked up and smiled, gesturing for him to come closer. "Some moments choose to return," she said, handing him a small object, a folded note, edges softened by time. "When they do, they bring understanding." He unfolded it slowly. Words written in careful handwriting seemed to float on the page, describing small kindnesses, soft attentions, and gentle courage. The boy traced each line with his finger, letting the essence settle as him. He realized that even unnoticed actions, small gestures of care, could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond their origin. Later he stepped outside into the courtyard, where the moon had risen pale and luminous. The water in the pool mirrored the night sky, stars reflected among floating lilies. He placed the feather on the water, watching it shimmer faintly. It did not sink nor drift away, but hovered, as if understanding the quiet rhythm of the evening. He sat there for a long time, feeling the slow passage of hours, the way night bends gently towards sleep. In that quiet, he understood that life was not always about grand events, but the soft, persistent moments that build love, care, and understanding. As he returned to his room, the house whispered its own lullaby, carrying him toward rest, toward calm, toward the kind of quiet awakening that did not end, but simply continued. The morning arrived with a delicate hush, the kind that brushed the world with gentle fingers. The boy stepped into the garden, feeling the feather warm against his chest, a quiet heartbeat that reminded him of all he had learned. Dew still clung to the petals, each drop catching the sunlight like a tiny lantern. He wandered slowly among the trees, noticing how shadows shifted, how the air held faint scents of lavender and moss. At the edge of the orchard, he found the sketching boy waiting with a small basket. Together they collected fallen blossoms, arranging them into patterns on the grass. Not for anyone to see, but for the sake of the act itself. The boy realized that joy could be small and quiet, found in attentive hands and patient hearts. Later, they returned to the house, where the elderly man with the moon-shaped instrument played a soft tune, slower than before, like the careful breathing of the world. The boy listened, letting each note rest inside him, stretching him wider in the gentle way music can. Words were unnecessary. Understanding lived in the pauses, in the tender spaces between sound and silence. As the day waned, the woman with the stones invited him to help build another mosaic around the pool. They worked in silence, placing each stone with care, feeling the rhythm of their movements mirror the pulse of the house. With every stone, he felt the quiet power of patience, of small efforts accumulating into something lasting, beautiful, and unspoken. When the sun leaned low, painting the sky in soft amber, the boy sat by the pool and released the blossoms into the water. They floated, spreading gentle ripples that reached every corner. He watched, understanding that even fleeting moments could leave enduring traces, and that what mattered most often remained unseen, but deeply felt. Night fell with the softest sigh, and the house seemed to fold around the boy, embracing him in warmth and quiet. Lanterns glowed along the garden paths, and the faint hum of the evening air carried memories of laughter, music, and the soft touch of hands guided by care. He wandered through the orchard one last time, noticing the shimmer of dew beneath moonlight and the subtle sway of branches. The sketching boy joined him, holding a small lantern. Together they walked, their footsteps muted by moss and grass, each step a gentle acknowledgement of the world around them. At the courtyard, the elderly woman awaited, holding a jar filled with petals collected from every corner of the garden. She handed it to the boy with a quiet nod. "Take them with you," she said. "Not to keep forever, but to remember the rhythm of care, the beauty of noticing." He accepted the jar, feeling its weight soft in his hands. Sitting by the pool, he traced the rim with his fingers and watched the water mirror the night sky. The feather rested on his lap, still shimmering faintly, a reminder of the hour that had slipped through the world and led him here. As he finally rose to return to his room, the house exhaled a gentle lullaby, carrying him toward rest. The stars above seemed to stretch in understanding, and he felt the slow pulse of quiet legacy settle around him, teaching that love, care, and attention leave traces far beyond the moments they inhabit. The house lay in quiet repose, the lanterns dimmed to a soft glow that barely disturbed the shadowed corners. The boy stepped into the garden one last time, feeling the cool night air brush against his face. The feather in his pocket pulsed faintly, a subtle reminder of the lessons carried across days, hours, and moments he would never fully measure. Every leaf, every stone, every ripple in the pool seemed alive with memory, as if the house itself remembered his presence and held it gently in its walls. He wandered slowly through the orchard, noticing the way moonlight pooled among the branches, the way shadows curved like soft sighs along the earth. The sketching boy joined him briefly, handing over a small pressed flower. "For remembering," he whispered, "so the quiet things you notice today will grow with you." The first boy tucked it carefully into his pocket, alongside the feather, feeling the weight of kindness and care settle warmly in his chest. At the edge of the courtyard, the elderly man with the moon-shaped instrument played one final note. It was slow, deliberate, and filled the air with a soft resonance that lingered long after the sound had faded. The boy understood that this music was not for performance but for remembrance, for the internal echo that teaches without words. He sat on the edge of the pool, watching ripples spread gently from a dropped blossom, feeling the continuity of small acts and patient attention. As he rose, he walked through the garden one final time, tracing familiar paths, touching the stones and leaves with reverent care. He paused at the archway, taking a deep breath of the night air scented with lavender and moss. The house behind him hummed softly, as if bidding him farewell while assuring him that the lessons, the gentle rhythms and the quiet presence would follow him wherever he went. Stepping onto the path that led away, he felt a fullness of calm, an understanding that legacy is not in grand gestures but in the quiet marks we leave in the hearts and minds of those around us. He walked slowly, letting each step linger, carrying the feather, the pressed flower, and the soft pulse of everything he had learned. Somewhere beyond the edges of the orchard and the glow of the lanterns, the boy paused to look at the stars. They seemed to stretch and sigh with him, welcoming the quiet of reflection and the infinite possibility of gentle action. And in that moment he understood that the world itself could be a place of patience, tenderness, and soft wonder, if one simply noticed. Night draped itself over the path like a soft velvet curtain, the stars stretching faint silver threads across the sky. The boy walked slowly, feeling the pulse of the feather in his pocket, the warmth of the pressed flower resting near his heart. Every step seemed deliberate, as if the world had slowed its own rhythm to match his, allowing him to move with the quiet weight of memory and care. He paused at the crest of a gentle hill, looking back toward the house. Its windows glowed faintly, holding the warmth of lanterns and the echoes of voices, music, and laughter. Though he had spent many days within its walls, it no longer felt like a place of instruction or discovery, but rather a sanctuary he could carry inside himself. The lessons had woven themselves into his being, to notice, to cherish, to move with patience, and to honor the quiet pulse of life. As he continued along the path, the orchard faded into shadow, and the sounds of evening softened to a tender hush. Somewhere distant, the sketching boy waved, a simple gesture that left a lingering warmth in his chest. The elderly woman and the man with the moon-shaped instrument appeared briefly at doorways, smiling quietly, a testament to the connections that endure without fanfare. The feather glimmered softly in the moonlight as he drew it from his pocket, letting it hover above his hand. It seemed to float of its own accord, shimmering with the gentle rhythm of all he had experienced. He inhaled deeply, carrying with him the scent of lavender, the touch of sun-warmed stones, and the hush of the garden pond. Each memory settled within him like water, finding its place in a quiet stream. He walked on, feeling the slow exhale of the world around him. The stars above seemed to wink in quiet affirmation, the air brushing lightly against his cheeks, and he knew that the gentle acts, patient observations, and tender moments would continue to ripple outward, touching corners of the world he had not yet seen. Finally, he paused under a tall oak, stretching his arms toward the night sky, feeling both small and infinite. The feather shimmered one last time before settling into his pocket, a companion for the journey ahead, and somewhere, he knew, the house waited silently, holding its quiet legacy in patient watchfulness. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. The night stretched endlessly above him, deep and velvety, studded with countless stars that seemed to hum softly in their places. The boy walked slowly along a winding path, each step deliberate, carrying the feather and the pressed flower tucked close to his chest. The world felt expansive yet intimate, as if every shadow, every ripple of wind, every whisper of leaves were gentle companions on his journey. He paused at a small clearing, where the moonlight spilled across the grass in silver pools. The feather slipped from his hand for just a moment, hovering above the ground before returning to him, as though it understood the quiet exhale of the evening. The pressed flower pressed gently against his heart, a reminder that even small, tender acts of attention could hold immeasurable weight. From afar, the house appeared like a soft memory, its windows glowing faintly with the warmth of lanterns, long since dimmed. He smiled, sensing that its lessons were now his to carry, the patient rhythm of noticing, the soft pulse of care, the quiet joy of gentle presence. He understood that these things, though subtle, had the power to ripple far beyond any single moment or place. He sat beneath a tall oak, resting his hands on his knees and tilting his face toward the sky. The stars seemed to lean closer, wrapping him in quiet wonder, each one a soft nod to the journey he had taken, to the people he had met, and to the small miracles of the everyday. The feather shimmered faintly once more, then rested still, a companion in quiet vigilance. A soft wind moved through the clearing, carrying the scent of lavender, moss, and distant rain. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting the world settle around him and within him, and in that peaceful pause he realized that life's most enduring treasures were not in grandeur or spectacle, but in the soft, persistent kindnesses, the attentive moments, and the gentle presence we leave behind. He rose slowly, walking on beneath the stars, feeling full, calm, and quietly infinite. The path ahead was unknown, yet he was unafraid, for he carried with him the lessons, the love, the subtle rhythms of a world that had taught him how to notice and how to care. And somewhere, he's still out there napping in the sun.
Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.